Back on TYT Sports, the aftermath of UFC 202, like an aftershock of a 9.5 earthquake, like the movie San Andreas featuring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Who tweeted about UFC 202?
Absolutely,
That's how we bring it
he
back
did.
full circle, Jason.
Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz absolutely delivered a product that the UFC should be dancing and partying about, because we can talk about that fight. I'm going to be talking about this fight for a long time. Any mention of these guys in any aspect of life, this fight will come up and we'll keep coming back to them because it truly was a spectacle. But it really gets down to this point. Is Conor McGregor the biggest UFC star of all time? Now, biggest is such a loose word. His comparisons, I guess you could make, are guys like Anderson Silva, who's one of the greatest of all time, but was he ever the biggest star? George St. Pierre, who the people will tell you, well, the people's champion, greatest of all, one of the greatest of all times too, and one of the biggest fighters of all time, and maybe coming back. And now McGregor, who commands both the octagon and outside of the octagon with everything that makes media companies drool. Dana White drool, businesses drool, sponsorships. Could you get me a napkin?
Usually.
Francis, do you think he's the biggest star of all time? Right now, it's obvious, but of all time.
Not yet. Do I think he has the potential to get there? Absolutely, right? And this is, again, fandom aside, this is just knowledge of sports in general.
Of business, really.
And of business. The reason why I'll say he will get there, and if I was to put the trademark face, the staple of the Ultimate Fighting Championship at the front and who's the biggest star, I would still say it's Anderson Silva. Just because he helped with his performance in the octagon, with what he encompassed, the knockouts, his persona, everything that he stood for, he's just a face that I imagine in my head. And this is just my opinion. In my head, I see Anderson Silva. That's not saying that George St. Pierre, I would argue back if someone else said it. This isn't as cookie cut as what Michael Jordan, LeBron James, or anyone else. Like Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time. At the moment, has LeBron James get a possible chance of surpassing him? Sure. I think so. Sure. But in this situation, I think it's a little more. I think it's a little closer than that. I think that Conor McGregor has every possible chance of surpassing every face in the UFC. Whether you like him or not, I'm not talking about just on his performances. He's proven people wrong with his ability inside the octagon, but it's what he stands for, and it's not solely him, it's the fact that the sport is growing. That's my main point. Is when Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, those guys in their era were so dominant and so fantastic, that's not taking anything away from them that they weren't as good as McGregor to get that crowd in. But it's just so happened that as McGregor's journey's going up, so is the UFC, so is the income, so is the exposure, so is the overall fandom outside of the core audience. That doesn't mean that the core audience's point of view has to shift. You can still always have Anderson Silva, George St. Pierre, Nate Diaz, Nick Diaz, whoever you want at the forefront of your list. But it just is the way it is. Conor McGregor's rise to fame has happened at the perfect time for the sport. So that my statement, as bold and as harsh as it may be on your innocent ears, it's true. The guy can be the biggest UFC star of all time until someone else comes along, which I have no doubt there will be. But if someone else comes along, they better have the ability alongside the character to back it up.
So what's interesting is I wish there was more, and I guess as the UFC grows, because the UFC is not going anywhere, obviously, but like we're in the UFC 200s. I'm curious how they're going to start breaking down more and more fights. If this is something that will eventually be, if there's more and more fighters, more and more, I guess, divisions, weight classes, whichever you want to call it, I wonder if there's going to be a UFC main event every single Friday or Saturday night type of thing. Right now, it's getting close to that. CM Punk returns to the octagon in like 2 weeks for a UFC 203, which is just following up UFC 202, and UFC 201 and 200 were not long ago.
Yeah.
But if they were to do a UFC man of the century or whatever you want to call it for each, from 1 to 100, 101 to 200. Yeah. You can pretty much put a deadlock in that McGregor probably is the 200 to 300 guy. Yeah. Because win or lose over the next few fights, one, we talk to Robin Black on 2 of our clips from the Fight Network. Please check those out. He knows inside and out the UFC and MMA altogether. But if he goes and fights featherweights, Robin's pretty sure, you're pretty sure, we're pretty sure that just that from fighting bigger, stronger, heavier opponents, it's going to look like chance to him.
Yeah.
So he's probably going to, that division's probably, it's out of the question, you can still win there. He has a main antagonist, a main villain in one Diaz brother, and I really can't think of a better villain for Conor McGregor, even though, because Diaz has a rabid following.
Yeah.
But in this case, I guess McGregor could be a villain. It's like the Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Two guys going at it. But my point being is that he commands a microphone in a press conference. He sells tickets. He's bringing a following from the,
from Ireland.
From Ireland.
And also a large UK following as well.
So the difference, though, was Silva brought a big part of the Brazilian following that grew with Anderson Silva. Silva was just so technically gifted, but he never was able to make the scene in a press conference, in a camera, on a TMZ, because a lot of those outlets didn't exist at the time.
That's what I'm saying.
So the more cameras that get shoved in McGregor's face, the better for the UFC, the better for Conor McGregor. He obviously isn't going to slip up over words either. It's not like somebody to take on. And obviously, one tweet and he can send everybody into a frenzy. I still don't like him for that specific moment in life. Yeah. Just have to remind the world that I'm not just the biggest McGregor fanboy, but as you mentioned, so I know just as well, the business side of things. This guy is as a, what's it called in the stock market? I forget the name. Just watching The Big Short recently. When it's just like so good, it's like a guarantee.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that the thing is that the thing we're talking about is always doesn't mean that the thing is always the best for the sport, and I think that he is at the moment. But it doesn't mean that, like, I always understand there's going to be fans that have been there since the very beginning. And my point to that is, if you were to bring a Chuck Liddell into today's day and age, he's every possibility of being the biggest.
He would have been great
because he's got the personality.
We need to clone Chuck Liddell.
Yeah, it's a sad thing, right? That the Frankie Edgars and the Demetrius Johnsons of the world won't get that same.
Hey, Demetrius has my fan.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Johnson has
loyal fans.
If we're gonna rank Johnsons, Demetrius Johnson, Dwayne The Rock Johnson. Sorry, go on.
But the needs,
Anthony Johnson.
The needs of the entertainment industry outweigh the needs of the core audience. That statement might be a little cloudy in there, but it's simply true. Is that when someone grabs when someone grabs a superior audience in terms of numbers, like, you will always have your niche viewership. You'll always have that viewership that no matter who is in the octagon, they will be there watching.
Absolutely.
They will be singing the praises of the person who's technically gifted, who puts on a great show, who is a great ambassador of the UFC. But if you're just to build the industry off of those fighters, you wouldn't get anywhere near where you are today. So while loyal UFC fans are protective of all those fighters that they love and behold, like the Nate Diaz's of the world, you need the Conor McGregors of the world if you want to get the fights that you just got. That's the fights that we're going to be talking about when we're in our late 60s. I am positive that this fight between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz 10, 15 years from now will still be in UFC classics.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think there's one other person who, if he were to stick to the UFC full-time and never made the crossover to the WWE, could have been right up there with McGregor. I think Brock Lesnar. If Brock Lesnar spent his life with the MMA and UFC, growing with the UFC, and learned how to really strike and stand up and fight opposed to the ground, like, that man commands an audience and single-handedly saved. Even though the fight wasn't great, him on the card alone sold enough tickets to bail out when Jones had to drop out of the fight against Cormier.
Which,
again, two examples. John Jones and Daniel Cormier, supremely gifted. John Jones, one of the most gifted fighters, I would say.
I would say he is the most gifted in
the
UFC.
MMA right now, pound-for-pound rankings. When he fights, I would think it's still John Jones.
I still think so, yeah.
The difference, though, I mean, he's only hurting himself in his own image. Yeah. However, Jones and Cormier doesn't make the fight that Diaz and McGregor does. And we might not get as good of a fight as that for the rest of the year, hence why it's a Fight of the Year candidate.
Yeah. It's because for John Jones as well, like, one, he's not reliable. You need to have your biggest UFC star who's going to step in.
That's why the Diaz brothers are so important to the UFC also, and I'm going to give them credit because they always step in.
Yeah,
they're the
when
first
they're not suspended.
When they're not suspended, but they get the call. They always get the call, and he goes, it's Saturday morning. You want to fight McGregor tonight? Yeah, I'll fight tonight. Let's go.
Yeah,
Let's go. Wait. Money. Okay, we're good. Let's go.
And those fighters, again, are necessary. You always need an antagonist to go along with the person that is your biggest star to push across. That's the only thing I think with John Jones is, as much as you want to make Daniel Cormier his antagonist and the other side to John Jones, it doesn't have the same X factor, because I generally think that Daniel Cormier is out there obviously for himself and to put forward his image, and he's getting on a little bit, but he's not there because he despises John Jones, right? Like, even if Nate Diaz and McGregor showed that level of sportsmanship, I bought into the idea that they two despised each other before it. Whether I think it was staged or not, certain parts of it, I still believe the whole walkout.
The press conference.
I still believe it was staged, but I believe that those two generally were at each other's throats up until that fight, and then when they were in the octagon, it was the very same thing. They were standing toe-to-toe with each other. However you feel the fight went, both of those fighters were in there to throw blows and to try and win the fight. I think that's what it generally was. And the last point I want to say about McGregor, and I know I can hear the comments, it's not in my mouth. Don't worry about it. It's somewhere in the area. I've stored it, but it's not in my mouth. It's not just the fact that he can bring in an audience, but he's genuinely an aesthetically pleasing fighter. I love watching someone who can strike like that in the octagon because I'm naturally a boxing fan. I've always been a boxing fan.
100%.
My knowledge of boxing still surpasses my ability to
100%.
break down MMA fighting and the UFC, but I love to see someone who can strike like that, someone who's got such a wicked cross on him, the ability to use that cross and attract that audience. He's aesthetically, everything that he's got gives the potential for him to be the biggest. He's not yet, and I know the question alone will really put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but you have to spit out that taste and swallow it with some money.
You can't, all right, Jesus, man. You can't make that many references. You're a disgusting human being, but I still love you anyway, Francis. Speaking real quick before we wrap it up, and comment below with everything you heard. Francis is off camera now. Gennady Golovkin sets at -800 to beat Kell Brook on September 10th. Maybe we'll get a boxing clip once in there. Francis is, oh my God. We're going to cut.